Welcome to Staying Connected, a podcast where I talk to other people about their stories with VEDS or Vascular Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Staying Connected. This is your host, Katie, and before we get into the show, I want to remind you that the views, information, and opinions in these podcasts are those of the individuals involved and do not represent the opinions of the Marfan Foundation. The Marfan Foundation is not responsible for and does not verify for accuracy any of the information contained in them, nor does the information constitute medical or other professional advice or services. This show is not produced by or affiliated with the Marfan Foundation or the VEDS movement. In our last episode, we heard from Dominic Corso, who was diagnosed with VEDS when he was 44 after a sudden medical emergency that revealed he was living with 3 aneurysms. In today's episode, we're going to hear from Charlene Terrell-Newman, whose son Luke was diagnosed with VEDS when he was 4 years old. Heartbreakingly, Luke passed away in October 2021 at the age of 15. Charlene tells us about Luke and his story with VEDS in this interview, and also talks about the emergency and mismanagement in the hospital that resulted in his death. An autopsy revealed he had experienced an aortic dissection and rupture. Before we go over to the interview, if you want to support this show, consider joining my Patreon. For a few dollars a month, you can make sure this show continues to reach people around the world with real-life stories about VEDS. You can join the Patreon at patreon.com/translucent1, and you can also support the show by sharing this podcast with people you know to help us raise awareness of VEDS together. Thank you so much for your support. Let's go to the interview with Charlene. Hi, Charlene. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast and sharing your story and, most importantly, Luke's story.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about Luke and just to share his story and have his legacy live on. I really appreciate that.
Yeah. So introduce yourself for everybody, and then tell us a little bit about Luke and how he was diagnosed.
My name is Charlene Terrell-Newman, and I have 5 boys, and Luke was my second child. When his older brother was 3, he was born. So we noticed that Luke was different right away. When he was a baby, we would change his diaper and there would be bruises where our hands were just on his legs. He'd fall down, the same sort of injuries that his older brother would have, but he would need like 10 stitches and just very easily cut, very easily bruising, these huge bruises. So the first thing that we did was talk to his pediatrician, and they had us go see a hematologist for the bruising issues. And he was diagnosed at 2 with von Willebrand's disease. And then they just kind of left it there for a while, but the cuts were getting worse. The bruising was getting worse. So they finally referred us to a rheumatologist, and the rheumatologist couldn't find anything on his parameter with Luke. So he referred us to a geneticist, and Luke was 4 at the time. And we were just really lucky because the genetic counselor had happened to know people that had the VEDS, and she thought that Luke looked a lot like them with his facial features. So they thought, well, maybe this is what is causing all of these things. So they ran the test, and sure enough, it came back positive for the VEDS.
So that was when he was 4 years old.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
So how did that change, like, your parenting? Did it change at all? I mean, like, was he the only one in the family? Like, tell me more about
Yeah,
all that.
definitely. So when we first thought he had the von Willebrand, it was concerning, but it wasn't that concerning. I think it's pretty common. It's like 1 in 100 people or something have it, and they have totally normal lives. So we weren't really worried about it. And then even after that, they were starting to like realize it was something different. One of the hematologists had told us, well, don't worry, whatever Luke has, it's not life-threatening. Like, it's just some weird thing, but it's not going to be life-threatening. So up until that point, until we got that diagnosis, there was definitely some concern, but we weren't as scared as we were after we got the diagnosis, obviously. And a lot of things changed. He started school the next year, and so we had to be, careful about what he was doing there. They had to know about his condition, no contact sports. Definitely things changed a lot. We're definitely a lot more worried about it. And then a lot more specialists as soon as he got diagnosed, he started seeing a cardiologist and getting echoes every year. Geneticist. He started seeing an ophthalmologist because there's some eye stuff that is concerning as well. And so, yeah, it definitely changed a lot. And he is the only person in our family that, as far as we know, has or had the vascular Ehlers-Danlos. And so it was new to us. Like it was something that I had never heard of. And I definitely learned more than I wanted to know about it in those first couple months after it was diagnosed, because I wanted to like understand what it was, but at the same time, it just scared me so much.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a scary diagnosis. And especially like, having a 4-year-old child with it, how did you cope with that as a parent? Like, how did you handle that information?
I mean, it was scary, definitely, but there was also some research and some studies going on, so there was a little bit of hope as well. The first one that actually caught my eye was the stuff that Dr. Dietz is doing, and so we actually wanted to see if Luke could see him. And when we brought it up with the geneticist was like, no, actually, Dr. Byers is the best one to see for Luke's condition. And he's only a couple hours away in Seattle. And so, we went and started seeing him. But it was definitely weird to go from having like a perfectly healthy child, as far as I knew, to now you got to worry about this, you have to worry about that, you have to see this doctor, you have to make sure he doesn't do this, you have to, and then he's a boy and I have all boys. So, his older brother and his younger brother, they're all, they'd wrestle and they'd play around and they'd do boy stuff. And it was like, Luke would get in there. It's like, no, 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 so I mean, I wanted him to feel normal and to feel like he was part of it, but I also had to be careful to make sure that he wasn't going too far and would get hurt, because we've had some pretty scary injuries with like falling and getting cut. I think one time he fell off a bed and it was a small tumble, but he had hit like a toy just perfect and he split his chin open, and he had to have like 40 stitches. There was like
Oh my
internal stitches and external. Yeah. And it was the same injury that his older brother probably had like 100 times and was fine, had a little bruise from it. And with Luke, it was just like his whole face was just split open.
How old was he when that happened?
I think he was 5.
How did he handle that as a 5-year-old? That has to be so terrifying.
So something that we noticed right away with Luke was that he just had this high tolerance for pain. It was crazy. He'd be split open or he'd have these huge bruises and he wouldn't even he'd take it all in stride. Like he would be a little bit worried and of a little bit in pain, but nothing compared to what you expect. So when he cut open his face that time when he was 5, he came and he had like a wash rag like on his face, and he's like, "Mom, I'm hurt really bad." And he was kind of whining a little bit, but it didn't seem like it would be that bad. And he took it off, and like it felt like half of his face was like hanging off because it was split open so bad. And I was like, "Wow." And he just like he had a ton of stitches and he was so used to the whole procedure that it didn't really affect him that much. A story I remember that I actually told at his memorial, when he was 2 and he was getting all the tests done for the von Willebrands and that line of thinking, he had to have like 15 vials of blood drawn at the hospital where they did the testing at. And he was sitting there taking it like a champ. And all of a sudden, one of the technicians, they had to have like a team of special technicians come in and hold him down and try to get the blood and stuff. And one of them's like, "Is this kid humming the theme song to Star Wars?" And sure enough, like Luke was sitting there just humming it. And like his jaw was all clenched, but he wasn't showing any pain. It was just all like strength. And he was 2 years old. It was crazy. And that's just always how he was with that kind of thing. Like he'd get hurt and it was just like, been there, done that.
Wow. He just sounds like such an incredible kid. Um, so at what age did you tell him about VEDS? Did he know?
He did know. We did it gradually. So when he first got diagnosed at 4, it was kind of a very simple explanation of, you need to take things a little more carefully than other kids your age. You can't do recess, you can't do PE, you can't do contact sports. So your life is a little bit different because you're more fragile. And as he got older and he started asking questions about it, I was honest with him. he didn't really start asking me about the severity of it until he was probably like around 12. And then he was like, hey, is this something that I could die from? Is this something that I could, get severely hurt from? And, we talked about it, and he was really good at doing his own research. So I knew that even if I didn't tell him, he would figure it out anyway. And he did do research on his own, and he did understand it fully. But it wasn't something that like he lived with in fear for a long time. It wasn't like he was 4 and it's like, this is going to kill me. It was more of like, okay, I have to be more careful. And then, it could also cause this, and oh yeah, and this, too. So yeah.
Yeah. And did he get to meet other kids with VEDS at any point?
Kind of. So we actually lived in Seattle for a year, and that summer that we lived there, Dr. Byers had hosted the West Coast family reunion. So we did take Luke. We could only stay for a couple hours. We had the other or 3 kids at home, and so we couldn't stay for very long. But he kind of got to meet kids a little bit and talk to them, but it definitely he never really saw what other kids were going through as much. Yeah.
Okay. And so it sounds like he had like stitches a lot and things with the ER. Did you, before we get into the really heavy thing that happened to him, did you have other experiences in the ER prior to this one?
Yeah. So most of the time we'd go to the ER because he would cut himself or he would fall and we'd have to get stitches, and it was, pretty straightforward. There were a couple times that I can think of that he had like a stomach pain. One time we all kind of had the stomach flu, and it just took him a lot longer to recover than everybody. So it was like 3 weeks later and everybody was fine and he's still having a lot of pain. And so we took him in for that because we were, concerned like, oh no, maybe something happened, while he was recovering and he's not all the way recovered or something. And they took us pretty seriously. They did a CT scan. They, really checked to make sure everything was okay. And it was, thankfully, he just, I think things just took a little bit longer for him because of the VEDS. And then I think one time we thought he broke his arm. He fell backwards, and, so we took him in for that. And again, they were pretty good with it, pretty good making sure that he wasn't hurt anywhere else. When he was in 8th grade, so when he was 13, I think, he got attacked at school by another student. It was started off as kind of like them just kind of getting mad at each other, getting into an argument, and then the other kid actually physically attacked him. And we took him to the ER for that, and they were really good. They got him right back for a CT. They really monitored him, really made sure there was nothing else going on there, and then stitched him up. And so I think for the most part, we had some pretty good experiences going to the ER before. Yeah.
So tell me what happened to Luke in October.
Okay. So prior to what happened in October, Luke it was really weird. So he has always been really small. He's always been really short, just very compact, strong kid, just not very big, which we expected because I know one of the things associated with the VEDS is short stature. So we expected he'd always be kind of smaller. But a few months before that, he had just kind of shot up. He grew a few inches, and he went from being this kind of little kid to almost as tall as I am. We could see eye to eye. And he was getting into boxing. He had a really big interest in it, and he would work out on his own at home. He was careful, but we had a punching bag and stuff, and he was taking vitamin C. And he just looked really good. That's what I remember the most in the last couple of months before, is he just looked really good. It would be, you just thought that, oh my God, maybe a miracle's happening. Maybe, it's getting better or whatever. That's kind of where my thought process was. But so that, I guess I'm saying this because it made what happened such a huge shock, such a huge surprise. So, it was a Friday morning, and he was at home, doing schoolwork. He decided to do online school this year, and he loved it. And he was in his room doing schoolwork, and I was in, we had like an office across the hall from his room, and I was working on some stuff. I was taking a class, a college class online too. And he came in and he was like, Mom, my back hurts really bad. I don't know what's wrong. It just hurts really bad. And my first thought was, well, you've been working out and stuff. Like it probably just strained something. So I said, why don't you take a bath and see if it gets better? And then we'll know if it's muscular, if it's, something we need to be concerned about. So he went and took a bath for about 5 minutes and he came out and he's like, it's not getting any better. It's still pretty bad. He's like, I kind of have this stomach ache too. So I said, okay, that's enough for me to let's just go get it checked out. It's probably nothing, but we need to go get it checked out because it's you. And so I remember my husband was getting the tire changed on his car. And so before we drove to the hospital, Luke and I dropped him off at the car place to go pick up his car. And because, at that point, like we just weren't that concerned. We knew that it was needed to get checked out, but it didn't seem like it wasn't getting any worse then. And so we're just like, okay, we'll just do this small errand and then I'll take him to the ER. And so we dropped him off. And then I was driving to the hospital and all of a sudden, like his pain just started getting like a lot worse. And so we're in the car and of course there's traffic because, why not? And he's kind of like yelling and getting mad and stuff. And I'm like, it's okay. We're going to be there soon. And he was getting a little bit frantic. But at that point, it still was like, I was a little worrisome, but he wasn't passed out. He was still able to talk to me. So I thought, okay, whatever is happening, like it can't be that bad yet. And he asked me on the way, he goes, Mom, what if this is it? What if this is the one that takes me out? And I was like, no, don't say that. It's going to be fine. We're going to get there. It's going to be fine. So we get to the hospital and it was like a 20-minute drive. It's not very far from our house. There was a little bit of traffic, say 20, 25 minutes. And we get there and we go to check into the ER. And this is an ER that we've never been to before. We decided to go there this time because all of his specialists are at this ER or at this hospital that the ER is located in. And so I knew if there was something life-threatening, they could call his specialist and they would come and know how to deal with his condition. And so we get there and we go to check in at the lobby and they're like, okay, well, this is the adult part. Like, we're going to send him to the kid part. And it was just right next. It was just right there, but it was like a different room. And I remember telling them like, he has this condition. Like, yeah, we know, we're aware of it. I'm like, okay, so we go to this room and they just leave us there for like a while. And he's getting more frustrated. He's in more pain. He's kind of like yelling and talking and getting really agitated and not able to like sit in one spot. And I'm getting frustrated. And it's like, what's going on here? Why aren't they taking this more seriously? They did like get us checked in at the children's ER, but they were like, well, it's going to be a little while. Like we don't have any rooms right now. And I'm like, so like, obviously like this could be something really bad. And I know they just kind of like blew it off. Like, he's fine. And he's getting more upset. And then like a nurse comes out and she was like, well, the doctor wants to try ibuprofen or Tylenol first to see if that'll make him feel better. And I'm just like, okay, well, when are we going to get down to like the important stuff, And she's like, well, I'll go talk to the doctor and tell him that the pain's getting worse. So she leaves and we're still like alone for a while. And I remember Luke had told me like, Mom, like go find someone, but there was no one around. Like it's really weird how it was set up. There was no like admin desk or anything for that children's part. You're just in this room and then it goes to the hospital. So my option was to go back out to the adult hospital, which they already kind of like turfed us to this other one, whatever, or start banging on doors to the hospital. And I knew that if I had done something like that, they would have not taken it seriously. And so Luke goes, Mom, if there was any time in the world to be a Karen, this is that time. It's like the pain's getting worse, And so I'm getting like really upset. He's really upset. The nurse comes back out again and she says the same thing. Okay, the doctor's ready to give him ibuprofen. And I was like, if he has a tear or something, like, is that really the best thing to give him because it's a blood thinner? And she was kind of condescending to me. And she goes, well, the doctor thinks it's fine. But if you're really worried about it, we can give him Tylenol. And so she gives him Tylenol. They bring him back to a room finally. Like this is like 2 hours after we get there. They finally like bring him back to a room. And they send in and I told the nurse, when I first checked him into the adult ER, I'm like, these are his specialists. He has a cardiologist here. He has a vascular surgeon here. Can we like, get them paged or whatever so they could come assess the situation? And they're like, yeah, we'll do it. But it was never done. And then we're in this room and they send in an intern. And she comes in and she's like, well, the doctor just wants me to get more information. And so she's asking all these questions about, his condition and stuff. And I repeat again, like, these are his specialists. Can you please get them? And she's like, yeah, we're working on it. And it's like, okay, whatever. So she leaves, and then the doctor finally comes in. It's been like 2 hours. The doctor finally comes in and he's like, and they had given Luke the Tylenol before we saw him. And Luke was feeling a little bit better. He really was, but he was still in a lot of pain. I mean, he was still like, complaining, yelling, like upset. And the doctor's like, well, I just want to give it some time to see if it gets better. And I was like, well, what about a CT scan? And he goes, Luke just had one a couple months ago. And I really don't want to expose him, to any more radiation or whatever it is, unless we absolutely have to. And I was like, yeah, but what if he has a tear or a rupture or something? And he goes, well, it's not, people that have those, they can't talk. They can't, walk around. Like, he would be in a lot more pain if that's what it was. And I mean, he was in a lot of pain, but again, he has that really high pain tolerance. And, so I'm concerned, the doctor doesn't seem too concerned. Luke's getting a little bit better. So it's like, okay, maybe. And then all of a sudden the pain just gets really bad. And so the doctor's in there with us, and Luke goes, he starts just like almost crying. And he's like, I love you, Mom. I love you. I love you. I love you. I love you. And then all of a sudden he starts like throwing up. And I go, okay, I'm like, okay, buddy, like you're sitting up and you're going to choke on, or you're laying down, like next time sit up. And he just, like, his eyes had just like rolled in the back of his head, and his lips get really white, and he's just still puking. And then the doctor finally is like, oh my God, like something's happening now. And they take him out to go like work on him out of the room. And I just remember yelling at the doctor. I'm just like, see, why didn't you take me seriously? And they take him back to this area, and they let me come and see him and stuff. And they're working on him. There's a whole bunch of doctors and nurses, and they're ordering medications, and they're checking all this stuff. And they asked me, they're like, okay, do you want to come in this room and wait with us? And then we'll figure out what's going on. And I was like, okay. So a nurse takes me back to this room, and they send in like a patient advocate person or something. I don't know. And we're sitting there talking, and then the nurse comes back and she goes, do you want to go sit with him? And I said, well, can I, is that okay? And she's like, yeah, it's okay. I just want to let you know that they lost his heartbeat like 10 minutes ago. And she's like, there's a protocol. They're trying to bring it back, but I just wanted to let you know that. And so that might change your decision to go see him. And I was like, well, then yes, I need to go sit with them. So they took me back to that area where they were working on him. And I remember listening to them talking, and one of the doctors was filling in a different doctor. And he's like, so this kid has Ehlers-Danlos. And it was like, once again, I was like, I remember screaming, he has vascular Ehlers-Danlos. They just, no matter how many times you say it, no matter how many times, they just don't listen. And it just progressively got worse. They were doing checks on him every minute to find a pulse. There was no pulse. They were doing CPR on him with a machine as they were working. And it was just like, I just knew that like things were not going to be okay. And luckily I got to sit there with him, and I got to hold his hand and talk to him. And eventually they said, would anybody object if I called it? And they didn't object, and they called his death. And it was like 2 minutes after they called it, my husband got there, because everything happened so fast that I wasn't able to tell him like how serious it was. And, finally, like, everything happened. It just all went downhill, and then he got there, and it was just a nightmare.
Yeah, I am so sorry that happened, Charlene.
Thank you.
How old was Luke when that happened?
15.
And did that doctor apologize or anything?
No. He did say that, I mean, they told me like, it wouldn't have mattered probably if we had a CT scan. It would have happened anyway. It might have happened on an operating table, but it probably still would have happened. But yeah, no apology or anything.
Was it his aorta?
Yeah. So he, after we agreed to do an autopsy, because we wanted to know, but we also wanted to see if it could help the vascular Ehlers-Danlos community, with research. And he had an aortic tear, and that's what the pain was. And then it ruptured.
So that was the moment that the pain got really bad and he started throwing up?
Yeah.
Okay. I just need to take a breath for a second.
I know.
Yeah. I'm really, truly sorry that happened.
Thank you.
So you've talked to me before about Luke and his personality, and I think you've told me before part of your desire to do this podcast interview and share his story is his own perspective.
Yes.
Do you want to share a little bit about that?
Definitely. So Luke was this very unique individual who just wanted to make everyone happy. He would give you literally the shirt off his back if he thought it would make you happy, and he would be cold because he wanted to make people feel good. And he had said from a long time ago that he wanted to do what he could to help make sure that other kids didn't have to go through what he had to go through, and he was willing to do any study, any test. Right before all of this happened, he was supposed to start taking a blood pressure medication. And it was kind of, I know it's something that they have proven a little bit helps, but it was also something that they're still like studying. And so he was kind of back and forth about, well, I don't think it's really going to help me. But then his final decision was, I'm going to take it because if it can help anyone else, then that's worth it to me. And so I know that he would want to make sure that other people wouldn't have to go through what he went through or what we went through, and he would want something good to have come from what happened.
Yeah. So I think sharing that story is really, it's hard to hear, of course, and I'm sure people listening are, have a hard time hearing it as well, because it is so, it's tragic, but it's frustrating.
It's so frustrating.
Yeah, this like fight to get through the emergency room, and sometimes no matter what you do, they don't listen. And sadly, this is one of those cases, it seems like, where you did everything you could,
Right.
and that's part of the most frustrating things about it, and that confusion with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome too.
Definitely. And we don't live in a little town. We live in a big city, and we have really good hospitals and really good specialists here. And we decided to take him to the hospital where his specialists were, where we thought they would be equipped to handle this if something like this happened. And they dropped the ball. And because of that, maybe the outcome would have been the same, but the trauma that I have to live with for the rest of my life, the trauma that I had to see him go through, all of his friends and family, like that's something that will never go away. And it's really frustrating that we had to go through that all of us had to go through that.
Yeah, absolutely. So why don't you share some of your favorite things about Luke as a mother?
Okay. Luke was just this amazing kid. From the very beginning, he just was so interested in everything, so curious, so smart, so vocal. He had a great vocabulary. He spoke really well. The first thing that he was interested in was dinosaurs. He just became obsessed with learning about them, fossils, that sort of thing. And then as he got older, that morphed into the Jurassic Park movies and the books. He read the Jurassic Park book when he was in 6th grade, The Lost World in 7th grade, and saw all the movies. And his favorite character was Dr. Ian Malcolm. So then he started becoming obsessed with Jeff Goldblum and went down that path of interest, and would follow like his music stuff and different movies and roles that he played. And so that was pretty cool. It was very random. He was really into history, especially World War I and World War II, and especially the weaponry. Like he loved tanks, the aircraft, the guns, all that stuff, and just like the history part about it. Just how things were made, how they worked. Weather was one of the things he got interested. He was in a lot of science stuff, so like weather was a big thing for him. He was into sharks for a while. We live about an hour and a half from the beach, and we'd go to the beach, and he just loved tide pooling. He could catch any animal. He caught lizards, snakes, frogs, big with that. Everywhere we went, he'd find, something to something passionate about. Um, what else? He got interested in boxing in the last few months, and it wasn't just like the sport of it, but it was the history of it. So he would name off statistics and famous boxers and famous fights, and follow that kind of stuff. It was really cool. Um, a couple weeks before everything happened, we went to this place in Oregon called the John Day Fossil Beds, which is like 4 or 5 hours from our house, I guess. And it was really cute because it was a trip he was supposed to take with his grandma, and she broke her foot, so she couldn't drive. She has an RV, and they were going to go in the RV. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess I can take you. I guess we'll just drive out there and rent Airbnb. And he wanted my brother to come because my brother's really into that kind of science and stuff too. And at the last minute, he invited his little brother, his 7-year-old brother. And he goes, Noah really likes this kind of stuff too. Do you want to come with us, Noah? And we thought it was really sweet at the time because it's like he could have had this time of just like mom and his uncle to himself. But instead, he like wanted to be nice and wanted to include his brother because he knew he would enjoy it too. So he ended up taking his little brother with us. And we just had the best time. Um, Luke really wanted to find a scorpion, and he did. He found a few scorpions, uh, which was scary to me and Noah, but his enthusiasm was so great that we found ourselves turning over rocks and looking for them too. Like we didn't want to catch them, but we wanted to be like, hey, look, we found one too. And we went and looked for thunder eggs, and he went and looked for lizards. We found some cool lizards and stuff. We were looking for rattlesnakes, didn't find any, thankfully, but that probably would have been like the highlight of his trip if we would have found one. Yeah, we just had a really great time, and I'm so glad we had that because that was like everything he liked to do, and it just showed his spirit and his interest and his passion, and it was great memories.
It sounds like he just has like the biggest heart.
Oh yeah, for sure. Just such an animal lover, such a, you know, just feels for everybody.
Mhm. So I want to ask you like one more question, I think.
Okay.
And it's a difficult question to ask because you've lost your child. And maybe the question is not advice to another parent, but advice to somebody else who's lost a child, or anything that you want the listeners to know, honestly, whether it's a medical professional or another parent who's lost a child or another parent who has a young child with this condition that might be listening to this and is terrified. Do you have anything you'd want somebody listening to know?
I mean, as any parent that has a child with a condition similar or the same as Luke's, as any parent knows, you got to fight for your child. And I think that that's definitely like something that I take with me with my other kids is being a mama bear and, just not even caring anymore. Just now, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to yell at doctors. Don't be afraid to, to tell people how you really feel, to argue with the school because no one else is looking out for them. And I think this whole experience just proves that like when it comes down to it, it's just you. It's just you that has their back. And so sometimes you have to be more than you think you are. And I think, I don't know if I could have argued and I could have gotten more done for him, but I know looking back at the whole journey, there's been so many times where I've had to like come out of my comfort zone and argue and rally and do all those things. And that's okay, and don't feel bad because that's what you were put on this earth for, obviously.
Yeah, and as a parent, like, you are the biggest advocate for your child.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Well, thank you so much, Charlene, for coming on and sharing, what like about Luke and what happened to him, and really helping to spread that awareness. I truly hope that somebody out there in the medical field is listening to this podcast and really takes this to heart, because this fight to get through the emergency room can have deadly consequences, and it shouldn't be this hard. You have a life threatening condition, or your child does, and you go to the emergency room seeking help. And that is the last place that you should have to fight for that help. So I hope that people listening who can do something about it, really take this message to heart.
I do too. And also, I mean, the emergency room is really important because that's kind of the last line of defense. But we've ran into so many doctors and so many, healthcare people who just don't believe, who just think, that I'm overreacting or that this condition isn't as bad as we say it is. And I hope that all those people who ever doubt, whoever, question, I hope that somehow it can get through to them that this is real, that there's other conditions that are just as bad. And like the whole motto is, just because it sounds like a horse doesn't mean it's a horse, could be a zebra.
Could be a zebra. Thank you so much, Charlene.
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for listening in today, and thank you so much, Charlene, for sharing Luke's story with VEDS on the show. I know that these episodes can be difficult to listen to, especially for those with VEDS and their family members and friends. Please practice self-care and get support from your support system if you need it. I'm sending big hugs and all the love to my community and to Charlene and her family. On our next episode on June 11th, we will talk to Dr. Shane Morris, a pediatric cardiologist who cares for many people with VEDS and is an incredible advocate for our community. Don't forget to subscribe to the Staying Connected podcast on your podcast player so you don't miss any future episodes. And if you like this show, I hope you will consider sharing it with your friends on social media to help us raise awareness of VEDS together. You can also support the production of this podcast by joining my Patreon at patreon.com/translucent1. Thank you so much, and I will see you soon.